You pointed this out to me earlier in the week, so why don't you get into Square Enix's latest financial reports and what we've learned from them this past week?
So this one was pretty interesting. Square Enix recently published their financial report for the last quarter and everything, and just there's some interesting notes and numbers. Overall, for anyone wondering on the numbers side of things, every single division seems to be on the up, which is great. Some of the gains aren't as nice as Square Enix would like to have, I would imagine, but overall things seem to be generally on the up for them. Digital entertainment went up about 2% from 2021, so a steady rise, not anything too crazy. That would kind of cover most of what we talk about here in the video game space. But for anyone interested in some of the other stuff that Square Enix does, in Japan they own the Taito amusement centers. So think of something like a round one sort of arcade center, but specifically with just Taito branded arcade cabinets. For the fighting game nerds out there, you're looking at the Vulix arcade cabinets with like Street Fighter V and similar sort of arcade cabinets. But also the amusement centers also have just Taito branded UFO catchers. So the little crane games, and of course they're naturally going to be filled with anime and manga related paraphernalia in them, as well as any other brands that Square Enix has opened up a licensing deal with. So amusement has gone up in a massive way, but that's only because of the lockdowns being lifted in Japan recently. So more people are feeling like they want to go out to the amusement centers and have some fun. Publishing has gone up a little bit, but part of that is just because of the fact that a lot of the manga that Square Enix has been publishing have been generally pretty solid titles. The one that most people will probably know that has helped Square Enix out a lot has been My Dress Up Darling. So for anyone who likes romantic comedy graphic novels, that is one that is actually published by Square Enix in Japan. Don't know who is localizing it in the West, so you'd have to get back to me on that.
Yeah.
The last category is one that legitimately surprised me, but only because of something that I'll point out after I talk about the numbers. Merchandising. That one went up almost a whole 5%. So a pretty good jump for that one, but the reason it's surprising is a lot of the Square Enix merchandise is quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
The Play Art Kai figures for like just the various characters that you can get from the Final Fantasy games, some of those figures range from the tune of anywhere from like $60 to $70 to like anywhere to a couple $100. So these aren't cheap figures. And then of course you've got some of the other premium merchandise that Square Enix sells. So things like the $130 Final Fantasy VII clocks that are sold in the Square Enix store, to just some of the Final Fantasy XIV everyday items like a folding glasses case or a change purse, that I think those items are like within the $30-$40 range. So the merchandise is really expensive. So it kind of surprised me that just merchandising is doing so well, considering how expensive their stuff is. But to loop around to the digital entertainment piece, this is where things get interesting, because the current CEO of Square Enix ended up making a point of the fact that previously they were able to rely on the Japanese market, mostly because of the fact that just the Japanese market for them has been quite reliable in the past. But in this financial report, the thing that makes it interesting is that he concedes that the Japanese population that used to be really into the Square Enix IPs and everything are starting to age out. And if they want to remain competitive and profitable, then the company has to start looking into operating and marketing globally. And it's interesting to me mostly because of the fact that just even now, just Square Enix will still do the really weird hinky shenanigans of releasing a game specifically for Japan only, and then they won't release it in the West. And it's something that I've seen repeatedly over the years. And of course, just combine that with some of the games that they've either developed or published not meeting sales numbers. It's just kind of one of those things of why are you just learning this lesson now? Just this should have been a lesson that you should have learned from other companies like Capcom, like Sega of all places. Hell, even Nintendo's learned how to market to the West as well too. So just it's just one of those things that just kind of surprised me that Square Enix is only finally now coming to terms with, hey, maybe we need to get better at learning how to sell games to the West because we can no longer rely on the Japanese market.
Yeah. Now, what do you think this will lead to? Do you think this will lead to them making more games solely for the West, or are they going to start marketing better to the West? Because I look at Square Enix games and I look at their sales being good because there are people who like their aesthetic, especially when it comes to Japanese style games. I don't think people are looking for them to do Western style games that are made by Square Enix. What do you think this will lead to?
Well, and that's interesting too, because that point is also covered in the financial report. So the CEO also makes mention to kind of tail into the conversation, which was we need to be better at marketing our games. We should not be erasing our identity and making games that are specifically catered to Western tastes, because the West has shown us that they want games that are uniquely Japanese, that have our unique sort of design and flair. So I don't think that will ever be going away, that they will still remain to hold their Japanese company identity. But I think it's more that they're going to have to learn to be better about porting their stuff to English, and maybe work a little bit more closer with Square Enix North America to do translation and localization. And then the last piece of the puzzle, I think, is going to be learning how to more effectively market to the West, because of the fact that just a lot of the Square Enix games, the marketing to the West is fairly light, if anything. Just unless it's just an absolute major game for Square Enix, then they'll kind of roll out the advertising budget and just do just like a massive advertising blitz. But I think the greatest example of just sort of the difference in marketing would be Final Fantasy 15 and Dragon Quest 11. Just when Final Fantasy 15 was about to come out and came out, just crazy marketing blitz. You had web ads, you had video ads on YouTube, you had ads on TV. Because I remember when I would be watching Adult Swim, you would see just TV ads for Final Fantasy 15. So crazy ad blitz for 15. And then Dragon Quest 11, barely much talk on the advertising end of it. I don't even remember seeing a TV commercial at all for the game or anything. And I think there were like a few sort of static picture ads for Dragon Quest 11, but yeah, just there really wasn't much marketing done with it. Granted, Dragon Quest 11 did all right sales wise, but yeah, it's just kind of one of those things of hey, Dragon Quest is one of your bigger IPs. Why didn't you do any marketing for it? I mean, yeah, sure, it's one of a more old-timey niche brands of Square Enix, but I mean, it is a Square Enix brand, so it was one of those things that kind of surprised me with just how light and scant the marketing was.
I
And
think
then,
I'm sorry. I think that's actually a smart idea because if they are recognizing that in the U.S. and the West, that Dragon Quest just isn't as popular as it is in Japan, you don't want to spend a lot of money marketing the game when you know it's not going to reach that audience. So,
yeah,
on the one hand, I get what you're saying. Probably put more marketing power into it might have helped. But on the other hand, there has been multiple games that, despite getting great reviews and great word of mouth, they just don't sell as well in the U.S. unless you rapidly change what the game is. So, and the other thing as well, you mentioned as well, Dragon Quest is a very old school game, and less people nowadays are into that turn-based style RPG. They aren't anymore, unfortunately. Like the younger set, especially when I show my nephew some of the games I play, he looks at it and goes, "This is boring." Like, and why is it just that? Why aren't there action? Why aren't they slashing or whatever on their own? Like most people, especially like I would say under the age of 30, find those games boring. Whereas someone like us doesn't and actually enjoy those games because they were ingrained in our childhood. So to a certain extent, I understand why they don't market it. They market that game heavily because the audience to that is limited. But I do get what you're saying. They probably should have marketed it a little bit more.
yeah. And then if the game is in even smaller sort of niche, sometimes the game may not even get any advertising at all, other than being mentioned either by an official PlayStation trailer or an Xbox trailer, or even a Nintendo Direct or a Nintendo of America video blurb or something.
Yeah.
Great example of that would be the Trials of Mana reboot. Just, I thought it was a fun game and everything, and all that, but again, yet another hyper niche game. And I can't remember what the sales numbers are. I want to say I think it did okay. It wasn't anything crazy gangbusters, but I think it was one of those. It sold okay. It didn't sell great, but it sold okay. So, yeah, just I think really it's going to be more about just Square Enix trying to make sure that any of their big games, that they make sure that their localization is on point, and that the marketing department does kind of get a bead on what Western gamers want, and everything, as far as just a good Japanese styled game with very good localization. And I guess, in my opinion, maybe no more hinky shenanigans of, oh well, just we're releasing this one piece of content specifically for the Japanese market only sort of shenanigans. So maybe that's another thing that they'll have to resolve, especially with what happened this week, which was where someone from the Star Ocean team had done an interview somewhere with a video game blog in the West, and there was a question from the interviewer going, "Hey, so is there any chance that all of us gamers in the West could get Star Ocean Second Evolution R for PlayStation out in the West, please?" And the reply was, "Oh, well, just the users need to make their voices heard, so we can bring up the desire to bring that game over to the West and everything." And it was just one of those things that the work has generally mostly been done, because the game was literally a port from the PSP version, which that in itself was a port from the PlayStation 1 version of Star Ocean Second Story.
Yeah.
And the worst part was Western gamers got snubbed by this back in 2014, because in 2014 we got the announcement for Star Ocean First Departure R, which was a reboot of the original Super Famicom game of Star Ocean 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got that announcement, but in Japan they got the double whammy of, hey, we're bringing you gamers in Japan Star Ocean First Departure R, but we're also bringing out Star Ocean Second Evolution R. So that was kind of something that kind of stung Western gamers quite a bit, because of the fact that just Western gamers kind of felt snubbed, going, okay, well, why aren't you bringing that over to the West? And then I think Square Enix ended up making kind of the resentment a little bit worse for Western gamers by saying, yeah, just there will not be an English edition ever. We aren't even going to release this game in English for Asian countries, so there will not be an Asian edition with an English language option on it. So it was one of those kind of decisions that, in my mind, was kind of odd. It was just kind of like, okay, well, why get this ham-fisted about not bringing Star Ocean Second Evolution R to the West? Because it seems like you've already got the work done. It doesn't seem like it would be that much of a stretch to just bring it out to the West. But okay, whatever Square Enix, I guess you're going to do what you're going to do.
Yeah. It smells like a sales tactic. They did that in order to basically goat people to get First Evolution R and buy that as much as possible, to then incentivize them to say, okay, maybe we'll release it. And then when the sales didn't turn out so well, because I guess Second Evolution was not with it, they just scrapped the entire thing and said, okay, well, then they don't want it. We'll just not bother. That's what it sounds like to me. Which, if the work's already done, like then I agree. I'm like, then why not release it at that point? But if there's still more things that have to be done, like you said, it wasn't localized. Second Evolution was not localized for American audiences. Is that correct?
Well, Second Evolution R, which was the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch version, was not localized, but it was based on the PSP Second Evolution, which that one was localized in English.
Right. I remember that one, yes. I don't know the changes that were done for R. Then to see, like, if they had to update the voice acting, or if they have to update, let's say, like, dialogue and stuff like that. So I don't know if that would have cost more money to localize it. But if there was, and First Evolution R did not sell very well at all, I can see Square Enix saying, you know what? We're not going to spend more money to release this and put more money into this when we know that X amount of people only bought the first one. So I don't see somebody buying the sequel when they haven't played the first one and are not buying the first one. So on that, I understand that. But on the other hand, I agree with you. Like, I'm a fan of Second Story. I have the PS1 version still, and I would like to see the remake come here. On the other hand, like, if the sales aren't coming, you're just wasting more money to bring something that's going to get less sales than the first. Is my thought process. Even though I think the smartest thing to do was to release them all in a bundle. Would be my thing, because then you have the value prospect of buying 2 full RPGs at one price. But yeah,
I think really where the point sort of gets interesting is, I know in private discussion with you, you had mentioned that, other than just Final Fantasy and maybe Dragon Quest, just Square Enix really doesn't have much to their name, and just they need to kind of do something, especially if this whole we need to learn to sell games better to the West is a concern, because just if they can't develop anything or dig into their back catalog to get stuff out, then it's only going to end up getting worse for Square Enix over time.
Yeah. Hire the people who are marketing Final Fantasy 16 right now, because their trailers have been really good. Like, I usually am not one that will buy an RPG or really any game really right away when it comes out, but I'm strongly considering 16 because of the way they are marketing it and how it looks and how basically how the game looks and how it plays. Like, I'm really interested in it and how the story looks. So hire them and find out what they're doing and then start marketing your games a lot better. But yeah, I mean, they do need to basically. I think the problem with Square has been that they've shunned their identity from the West. They've kept their identity from what they are in Japan, and they've been Square that entire time. But when it comes to the West, they've been trying to masquerade as like an EA or Ubisoft and stuff like that, to have something that it is made by Square Enix, quote unquote, but is not a Square Enix game. I think they need to rebuild their identity back from the 90s and the PS1 era, where they were an RPG Japanese house that made excellent games that Westerners were interested in. I think that's their best bet in this.
Personally, I would love for Square Enix to maybe even kind of try to dive into their back catalog of stuff and just maybe release them as anthologies. One of the things that I would love to see would be a reissue of the saga of games that was developed by Quintet, which I believe the IPs were technically owned by Enix, which has now been integrated into Square Enix now. But I would love to see the trilogy of games of Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terra Enigma bundled into one mega bundle that covers that entire saga, because all three games are great games, and especially with just some of the renewed interest in retro gaming, I think it would just be a prime opportunity to kind of get in on it while the getting's good, and get the entire trilogy. Just set it up for a bundle for maybe like $40-50, maybe 60 if you want to stretch it that far. But yeah, I think it would be great to kind of see Square try to dive a little bit into their back catalog of stuff, because there were a lot of games that came out in either Japan only or Japan and Europe that never came out to North America, and they've got a huge back catalog to dive into. And I think that there's a real high potential of really potentially making some money, especially if they want to try to do some quick stuff. And I mean, it can be kind of like a bare bones translation. Just, hey, we're just doing the bare minimum to translate it as quickly as possible. And, just if it's kind of like a one-off Super Nintendo game like Treasure Hunter G or something, maybe market that for like $15-20. And, if it sells maybe like 100,000 units or something, maybe that ends up covering the cost of just the localization team just doing the translation and making sure that the text fits okay in the Western release. So
yeah,
I think that's really my thought on one of the ways that Square can sort of diversify their catalog.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. It really is, because they have a rich history of games that they can dive into and release them as anthologies, like what Nippon Ichi Software is doing with their anthologies right now.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. Terra Enigma is something that I keep hearing that people rave about that I've never been able to try. So I would definitely like to see that. I think they should dive into what made them popular in the first place, which is the PS1 catalog. I mean, if they start doing volumes where, okay, here's Brave Fencer Musashi and Ian Honda, and then next year we'll have Bushido Blade 1 and 2 and stuff like that, I think that would not be a bad idea on their end, just to re-release those things and get people who are nostalgic for their products to dive into those games, or do like the Bouncer and Airgeist. Actually, that probably won't sell, but but yeah, like start getting those properties back out there, sell them for like 20, 30, 40 bucks and see where it goes from there. You might be surprised when you do a bare bones port of these games that some of them sell quite well, and then, oh my god, we can do something with this. Like, imagine if Airgeist actually sells well. Good lord. I mean, the world will come to an end, but hey, you know, imagine if. So, yeah, they have a lot of properties they can use, and they should be a lot better with marketing those properties. I think Forspoken is a great example of that, since the last time we spoke of Forspoken was a terrible ad they did that made people laugh at it more than anything. They definitely should look at their properties and just do what Nippon Ichi is doing and just start saying, hey, we are re-releasing these. So if you're interested in these old school games for like the Switch and PC, there you go. That would work well. I mean, they did it with Collection of Mana. Why not do it with other games? Anything more to add? Good.
And hell, even I wouldn't even be opposed to stuff like reboots, like the Front Mission reboots that they're kind of sourcing out to Forever Entertainment. Yeah, I would be perfectly fine with reboots as well too. So just I think really just Square needs to try to diversify their strategy and everything, especially if they want to remain sustainable and profitable within the distant future. That to have them concede and mention and say, hey, we need to be better about marketing and selling our games in the West because we can no longer rely on the Japanese market. That's one hell of a concession to make in defeat, but at the same time, it's going to be up to them on how they dig themselves out of the hole that they've gotten themselves into.
That's right. Absolutely. Thank you for listening to this podcast segment. The Capital Games podcast is done every week, and we post it on all your favorite podcast apps, as well as segments on YouTube. If you want to listen to another segment, you can listen to a new one right there on the screen. We also do a movie podcast called the Capital Games Movie Club. If you'd like, you can go ahead and click on that and see all the movies that we have reviewed from that point. Thank you for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon.